Chapter 12, Part 1 of Glimpses of Italian Society in the 18th Century by Hester Lynch PIOZZI. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lago Maggiore, Return to Verona, Part 1. We've got a country house for the remaining part of the hot weather upon the confines of the Milanese dominions where Switzerland first begins to bow her bleak head and soften gradually in the sunshine of Italian fertility. From every walk and villa round this delightful spot one sees an assemblage of beauties rarely to be met with, and there is a resemblance in it to the Vale of Clwyd, which makes it still more interesting to me. But we have obtained leave to spend a week of our destined villeggiatura at the Borromean Palace, situated in the middle of Lago Maggiore, on the island so truly termed Isola Bella, every step to which from our villa at Varese teems with new beauties, and only wants the sea to render it in point of view of mere landscape superior to anything we have seen yet. Our manner of living here is positively like nothing real, and the fanciful description of Oriental magnificence with Sagard's retirement in the Rambler to his palace on the Lake d'Ambea is all I have ever read that could come in competition with it. For here is one barge full of friends from Milan, another carrying a complete band of 13 of the best musicians in Italy to amuse ourselves and them, with concerts every evening upon the water by moonlight, while the inhabitants of these Elysian regions who live upon the banks come down in crowds to the shores, glad to receive additional delight where satiety of pleasure seems the sole evil to be dreaded. It is well known that the wild mountains of Savoy, the rich plains of Lombardy, the verdant pastures of Piedmont and the pointed Alps of Switzerland form the limits of Lago Maggiore, where upon a naked rock, torn, I trust, from some surrounding hill, or happily thrown up in the middle of the water by a subterranean volcano, the Count Borromeo in the year 1613 began to carry earth and lay out a pretty garden, which from that day has been perpetually improving, till an appearance of eastern grandeur which it now wears is rendered still more charming by the studied elegance of art and the conveniences of common life. The palace is constructed as if to realise Johnson's ideas in his Prince of Abyssinia. The garden consists of 10 terraces, the walls of which are completely covered with orange, lemon and cedrati trees, whose glowing colours and whose fragrant scent are easily discerned at a considerable distance, and the perfume particularly often reaches as far as the opposite shore. Nor are standards of the same plants wanting. I measured one, not the largest in the grove, which had been planted 105 years. It was a full yard and a quarter round. There were 46 of them set near each other and formed a delightful shade. The cedrati fruit grows as large as a late Romana melon with us in England. And everything one sees and everything one hears and everything one tastes brings to one's mind the Fortunate Islands and the Golden Age. Walks, woods and terraces within the island, and a prospect of unequalled variety without, make this a kind of fairy habitation, so like something one has seen represented on theatres that my female companion cried out as we approached the place, "If we go any nearer now, I'm sure it will all vanish into air." There is solidity enough, however. A little village consisting of 18 fishermen's houses, and a pretty church with a dozen of well-grown poplars before it, together with the palace and garden, compose the territory, which commodiously contains 250 souls, as the circuit is somewhat more than a measured mile and a half, but not 2 miles in all. and we have cannons to guard our calypso-like dominion, for which Count Borromeo pays tribute to the King of Sardinia, but has himself the right of raising men upon the mainland, and of coining money at Macan, a little town amid the hollows of these rocks which present their regular fronts to the lake in a manner surprisingly beautiful. He has 3 other islets on the same water for the change of amusement, of which that named La Superiore is covered with a hamlet, and l'Isola Madre with a wood full of game, guinea-fowl and common poultry. A summer house beside, furnished with chintz, and containing so many apartments that I am told the uncle of the present possessor, having quarrelled with his wife, and resolving in a pet to leave the world, shut himself up on that little spot of earth and never touched the continent, as I may call it, for the last 17 years of his life. Let me add that he had there his church and his chaplain, 3 musical professors in constant pay, and a pretty yacht to row or sail and fetch in friends, physicians, etc., from the mainland. His nephew has not the same taste at all, seldom spending more than a week, and that only once a year, among his islands, which are kept, however, quite in a princely style. The family crest, a unicorn made in white marble and of colossal greatness, proudly overlooking 10 broad terraces, which rise in a pyramidal form from the water, each wall richly covered with orange and lemon trees, and every parapet concealed under thickly flowering shrubs of incessant variety, as if every climate had been culled to adorn this tiny spot. More than 100 beds are made in the palace, which has likewise a grotto floor of infinite ingenuity, and beautiful from being happily contrasted against the general splendour of the house itself. I have seen no such effort of what we call taste since I left England as these apartments on the level with the lake exhibit, being all roofed and wainscoted with well-disposed shell-work and decorated with fountains in a lively and pleasing manner. Some large history pieces adorn the walls of the vast room we dined in, where, though we never sit down fewer than 20 or 25 people to table, all seem lost, from the greatness of its size till a concert fills it in the evening. It is the garden, however, more than the palace, which deserves description. He who has the care of it was born upon the island, and never strayed further than 4 miles, he tells me, from the borders of his master's lake. Sure, he must think the fall of man a fable. He lives in Eden still. How much must such a fellow be confounded could he be carried blindfolded in the midst of winter to London or to Paris, and set down in Fleet Street or Rue Saint-Honoré. That he understands his business so as to need no tuition from the habitants of either city may be seen by a fig tree which I found here engrafted on a lemon. Both bear fruit at the same moment, while a vine curls up the stem of the lemon tree, dangling her grapes in that delicious company with apparent satisfaction to herself. Another inoculation of a moss rose upon an orange, and a third of a carnation upon a centrati tree, gave me new knowledge of what the gardener's art, aided by a happy climate, could perform. But when rowing round the lake with our band of music yesterday, we touched at a country seat upon the side which joins the Milanese dominion, and I found myself presented with currants and gooseberries by a kind family, who, having made their fortune in Amsterdam, had imbibed some Dutch ideas. We returned to our enchanted palace with music playing by our side. I never saw a party of pleasure carried on so happily. The weather was singularly bright and clear, the moon at full. The French horns, breaking the silence of the night, invited echo to answer them. The 9 days, and we enjoyed 17 or 18 hours out of every 24, seemed 9 minutes. When we came home to our country house in the Verasotto, verses and sonnets saluted our arrival and congratulated our wedding day. Of the noblemen's seats in the neighbourhood, it may indeed be remarked that however spacious the house, and however splendid the furniture may prove upon examination, however pompous the garden may be to the first glance, and the terraces however magnificent, spiders are seldom excluded from the mansion, or weeds from the pleasure ground of the possessor. A climate so warm would afford some excuse for this nastiness. Could one observe the inhabitants were discomposed at such an effect from a good cause, or if one could flatter oneself that they themselves were hurt at it? But when they gravely display an embroidered bed or counterpane worthy of Arachne's fingers before her metamorphosis, covered over by her present labours, who can forbear laughing? The gardener, in 2 minutes arriving to assist you up slopes, all flourishing with cat's tail and poppy, while your friends cry, "Here, this is nature, is it not? Pure nature. Tutto naturale, sì, secondo l'uso inglese." Note, also natural and pretty, quite in the English style. End note. But I am disturbed from writing my book by the good-humoured gaiety of our cheerful friends, with whom we never sit down fewer than 14 or 15 to table, I think, and surely never rise from it without many a genuine burst of honest merriment, undisguised by affectation or fettered by restraint. Our gentlemen make improviso rhymes and cut comical faces, go out to the field after dinner and play at a sort of blind man's buff, which they call breaking the pan. Nor do the low ones in company arrange their minds, as I see, in compliment to the high ones, but tell their opinions with a freedom I little expected to find. Mixed society is very rare among them, almost unknown, it seems, but when they do mix at a country place like this, the great are kind, to do them justice, and the little not servile. They are wise indeed in making society easy to them, for no human being suffers solitude so ill as does an Italian. An English lady once made me observe that a cat never purrs when she is alone. Let her have what meat and warmth she will. I think these social spirited Milanese are like her, for they can hardly believe that there is existing a person who would not willingly prefer any company to none. When we were at the islands 3 weeks ago, "A charming place," says one of our companions, "cioè con un mondo d'amici così." Note, that is, with a heap of friends about one in this manner. End note. But with one's own family, methinks, said I, and a good library of books, this sweet lake to bathe in. "Oh," they cried all at once, "Dio ne liberi." Note, "Oh, God, keep one from that." End note. This is national character. Why there are no birds of the watery kind, coots, wild ducks, kargis, upon these lakes, nobody informs me. I have been often told that of Geneva swarms with them, and it is but a very few miles off. Our people, though, have little care to ascertain such matters, and no desire at all to investigate effects and causes. Those who study among them study classic authors and learn rhetoric. Poetry, too, is by no means uncultivated at Milan, where the Abate Perini's satires are admirable and so esteemed by those who themselves know very well to write and how to judge. Common philosophy, la physique, as the French call it, geography, astronomy, chemistry, are oddly left behind somehow. And it is to their ignorance of these matters that I am apt to impute Italian credulity, to which every wonder is welcome. Lugano. We have now passed one day in Switzerland, rowing to the little town Lago over its pretty lake. A fanciful traveller might be tempted to think he could discern some streaks of liberty in the manners of the people, if it were but in the innkeeper at whose house we dined. This may, however, be merely my own prejudice, and somebody told me it was so. We were shown on one side the water as we went across a small place called Campioni, which is Fero Imperiale and governed by the Padre Abate of a neighbouring convent, who has power even over the lives of his subjects for 6 years, at the expiration of which term another despot of the day is chosen, appointed, I should have said, and the last returns to his original state, amenable, however, for any very shocking thing he may have done during the course of his dictatorship, and no complaint has been ever made yet of any such governor so circumstanced and appointed. His conduct is commonly but too mild and clement. This I thought worth remarking as consolatory to one's feelings. Lugano, meantime, scorns absolute authority. A cicerone there, in reply to the question asked in Italy 3 times a day, I believe, "Che principe fa qui la sua residenza?" Note, what prince makes his residence here? End note. Replied that they were plagued with no principe at all, while the 13 cantons protected all their subjects, and though, as the man expressed it, only half of them were Christians and the other half Protestants, no church or convent had ever wanted respect, while their town regularly received a monthly governor from every canton, and was perfectly contented with this ambulatory dominion. Here was the first gallows I have seen these 2 years. They have a pretty commerce, too, at Lugano for the size of the place, and the shopkeepers show that officiousness and attention seldom observed in arbitrary states where, quote, "content, the bane of industry," unquote, soon leads people to neglect the trouble of getting for the pleasure of spending their money. One therefore sees the inhabitants of Italian cities for the most part merry and cheerful, or else pious and penitent, little attentive to their shops, but easily disposed to loiter under their mistress's window with a guitar, or rove about the streets at night with a pretty girl under their arm, singing as they go, or squeaking with a droll accent if it is the time for masquerades. Fraud, avarice, ambition are the vices of republican states and a cold climate. Idleness, sensuality and revenge are the weeds of a warm country and monarchical governments. If these people are not good, they at least wish they were better. They do not applaud their own conduct when their passions carry them too far. They beat their bosoms at the foot of a crucifix in the street with no more hypocrisy than they beat a tambourine there. Perhaps with no more effect neither, if no alteration of behaviour succeeds their contrition. Yet when an Englishman, who is probably more ashamed of repenting than of sinning, accuses them of false pretensions to pious fervour, he wrongs them and would do well to repent himself. End of Chapter 12, Part 1. Chapter 12, Part 2 of Glimpses of Italian Society in the 18th Century by Hester Lynch PIOZZI. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Maggiore, Return to Verona, Part 2. Bergamo. Bergamo is built up a steep hill. Like Lansdowne Road at Bath, the buildings not so regular, the prospect not inferior but of a different kind, resembling that one sees from Rootham Hill in Kent, but richer, and presenting a variety beyond credibility, when it's premised that scarce any water can be seen, and that the plains of Lombardy are low and flat. Within the eye, however, one may count all the original blessings bestowed on humankind: corn, wine, oil, and fruit. The enclosures being small too, and the trees touffus, as the French call it. No parterre was ever more beautifully disposed than are the fields surveyed from the summit of the hill where stands the Marquis's palace, elegantly sheltered by a still higher rising ground behind it, and commanding from every window of its stately front a view of prodigious extent and almost unmatched beauty, as the diversification of colouring reminds one of nothing but the fine pavement at the Roman Pantheon. So curiously intersected are the patches of grass and grain, flax and vines, arable and tilth, in this happy disposition of earth and its most valuable products, while not a hedge fails to afford perfume that fills the very air with fragrance, from the sweet jessamine that, twisting through it, lends a weak support to the wild grapes, which, dangling in clusters, invite 10,000 birds of every European species, I believe, below the size of a pigeon. Nor is the taking of these creatures by the roccolo to be left out from among the amusements of Braesian and Bergamasque nobility, nor is the eating of them, when taken, to be despised. Beccaficos and ortolans are here in high perfection, and it was from these northern districts of Italy, I trust, that Vitellius and all the classic gluttons of antiquity got their curious dishes of singing bird pie, etc. The rich scent of melons at every cottage door is another delicious proof of the climate's fertility and opulence, where every sense is lost in every joy, as Hughes expresses it, and where in the delightful villa of our highly accomplished acquaintance, the Marquis of Araceli, we have passed 10 days in all the pleasures which wit could invent, money purchase, or friendship bestow. The last nobleman who resided here, father to the present lord, was Cavalier Servente to the immortal Clelia Borromeo, whose virtues and varieties of excellence would fill a volume. Could I clear my head of prejudice for such talents as I find here, and my heart of partial regard, which is in reality but grateful friendship justly due from me for so many favours received, could I forget that we are now once more in the state of Venice, where everything assumes an air of cheerfulness unknown to other places, I might perhaps perceive that the fair at Bergamo differs little from a fair in England, except that these cattle are whiter and ours larger. How a score of good ewes now, as Master Shallow says, but I really did ask the price of a pair of good strong oxen for work, and heard it was 10 zecchines, about half the price given at Blackwater, but ours are stouter and capable of rougher service. It is strange to me where these creatures are kept all the rest of the year, for except at fair time one very seldom sees them, unless in actual employment of carting, ploughing, etc. Nothing is so little animated by the sight of living creatures as an Italian prospect. No sheep upon their hills, no cattle grazing in their meadows, no waterfowl, swans, ducks, etc. upon their lakes, and when you leave Lombardy, no birds flying in the air, save only from time to time, betwixt Florence and Bologna, a solitary kite soaring over the surly Apennines and breaking the immense void, which fatigues the eye. A ragged lad or wench, too, now and then leading a lean cow to pick among the hedges, has a melancholy appearance, the more so as it is always held fast by a string and struggles in vain to get loose. These, however, are only consequences of luxuriant plenty. For where the farmer makes 4 harvests of his grass, and every other speck of ground is profitably covered with grain, vines, etc., All possibility of open pasturage is precluded. Horses, too, so ornamental in an English landscape, will never be set loose in an Italian one, as they are all chevaux entiers, and cannot be trusted in troops together as ours are, even if there was ground unenclosed for them to graze on, like the common lands in Great Britain. A nobleman's park is another object never to be seen or expected in a country where people would really be deserving much blame did they retain in their hands for mere amusement 10 or 12 miles circuit of earth capable to produce £2,000 or £3,000 a year profit to their families, beside making many tenants rich and happy in the meantime. I will confess, however, that the absence of all these agréments gives a flatness and uniformity to the views which we cannot complain of in England, but when Italians consider the cause, they will have reason to be satisfied with the effect, especially when vegetable nature flourishes in full perfection, while every step crushes out perfume from the trodden herbs, and those in the hedges dispense with delightful liberality of fragrance that enchants one. Hops and pyracanthus cover the sides of every cottage, and the scent of truffles attracts, and the odour of melons gratifies one's nerves when driving among the habitations of fertile Lombardy. Milan. We are now cutting hay here for the last time this season, and all the environs smell like spring on this 15th of September, 1786. The autumnal tint, however, falls fast upon the trees, which are already rich with a deep yellow hue. A wintry feel upon the atmosphere early in the morning, heavy fogs about noon, and a hollow wind towards the approach of night make it look like the very last week of October in England, and warn us that summer is going. The same circumstances prompt me, who am about to forsake this, her favourite region, to provide furs, flannels, etc. for the passing of those Alps which look so formidable when covered with snow, even at their present distance. Our swallows are calling their clamorous counsel round me while I write, but the butterflies still flutter about in the middle of the day. The grapes are growing more wholesome, as with us when the mornings begin to be frosty. Our desserts, however, do not remind us of Tuscany. The cherries here are not particularly fine, and the peaches all part from the stone, miserable things. An English gardener would not send them to table. The figs, too, were infinitely finer at Leghorn, and nectarines have I never seen at all. Well, here is the opera begun again. Some merry wag, Abate Casti, I think, has accommodated and adapted the old story of King Theodore, to put in ridicule the present King of Sweden, who is hated of the Emperor for some political reasons, I forget what, and he, of course, patronises the jester. Our honest Lombards, however, take no delight in mimicry, and feel more disgust than pleasure when simplicity is insulted, or distress made more corrosive by the bitterness of a scoffing spirit. I have tried to see whether they would laugh at any oddity in their neighbour's manner, but never could catch any, except perhaps now and then a sly Roman who had a liking for it. I see nothing absurd about the man, says one gentleman. Everybody may have some peculiarity, and most people have, but such things make me no sport. Let us, when we have a mind to laugh, go and laugh at Punchinello. From such critics, therefore, the King of Sweden is safe enough, as they have not yet acquired the taste of hunting down royalty and crowing with infantine malice when possessed of the mean hope that they are able to pinch a noble heart. This old-fashioned country, which detests the sight of suffering majesty, hisses off its theatre a performance calculated to divert them at the expense of a sovereign prince, whose character is clear from blame, and whose personal weaknesses are protected by his birth and merit, while it is to his open, free, and politely generous behaviour alone they owe the knowledge that he has such foibles. Paisiello, therefore, cannot drive it down by his best music, though the poor King of Sweden is a Lutheran too, and if anything would make them hate him, that would. One vice, however, sometimes prevents the commission of another, and that same prevailing idea which prompts these prejudiced Romanists to conclude him doomed to everlasting torments who dares differ from them, though in points of no real importance, inspires them at the same time with such compassion for his supposed state of predestinated punishment that they rather incline to defend him from further misery and kindly forbear to heap ridicule in this world upon a person who is sure to suffer eternal damnation in the other. But the Spanish grandee, who not only entertained but astonished us all one night with his conversation at Quirini's casino in Venice, is arrived here at Milan and plays upon the violin. He challenged acquaintance with us in the street, half invited himself to our private concert last night, and did us the honour to perform there with the skill of a professor, the eager desire of a dilettante, and the tediousness of a solitary student. He continued to amaze, delight, and fatigue us for 4 long hours together. He is a man of prodigious talents and replete with variety of knowledge. A new dance has been tried out here too, but was not well received, though it represents the terrible story which, under Madame de Genlis's pen, had such uncommon success among the reading world, and is called La Sepolta Viva. But as the Duchess Gerafalco, whose misfortune it commemorates, is still alive, the pantomime will probably be suppressed, for she has relations at Milan, it seems, and one lady, distinguished for elegance of form and charms of voice and manner, told me yesterday with equal sweetness, spirit, and propriety, that though the King of Naples sent his soldiers to free his aunt from that horrible dungeon where she had been 9 years confined, yet if her miseries were to become the subject of stage representation, she could hardly be pronounced happy or even at ease. With these reflections and many others excited by gratitude to private friends and general admiration of a country so justly esteemed, we shall soon take our leave of Milan, famed for her truly hospitable disposition, a temper of mind sometimes abused by travellers, perhaps, whose birth and pretensions are seldom or ever inquired into, whilst no people are more careful of keeping their rank inviolate by never conversing on equal terms with a countryman and woman of their own who cannot produce a proper length of ancestry. I will not leave them, though, without another word or two about their language, which, though it sounded strangely coarse and broad, to be sure, as we returned home from Florence, Rome, and Venice, I felt sincerely glad to hear again, and have some notion, by their way of pronouncing bicchiere, a word used here to express everything that holds water, that our pitcher was probably derived from it. And the Abate di Vecchio, a polite scholar and an uncommonly agreeable companion, seemed to think so too. His knowledge of the English language, joined to the singular power he has over his own elegant Tuscan tongue, made me torment him with a variety of inquiries about these confusing dialects, which leave me at last little chance to understand any, whilst a child is called bambino at Florence, putto at Venice, sciatto at Bergamo, and creatura at Rome. And at Milan they call a wench tosa, an apron is grembiule, at Florence I think traversa, at Venice bigarol, at Brescia and some other parts of Lombardy senale, at Rome and at Milan scorza. A foreigner may well be distracted by varieties so striking, but the turn and idiom differ 10 times more still, and I love to hear a Milanese call an oak robor rather than querela, somehow, and tell a lady when dressed in white that she is tutta in albedine. Verona. But it is time to leave all this and rejoice in my third arrival at gay, cheerful, charming Verona, whither some sweet leave-taking verses have followed us, written by the facetious Abate Ravasi, a native of Rome, but for many years an inhabitant of Milan. His agreeable sonnet, every line ending with toto, being upon a subject of general importance, would serve as a better specimen of his abilities than lines dictated only by partial friendship, but I hear that is already circulated about the world and printed in one of our magazines. To them let him trust his fame. They will pay my just debts. We have now seen this enchanting spot in spring, summer and autumn, nor could winter's self render it undelightful, while uniting every charm and gratifying every sense. Greek and Roman antiquities salute one at the gates. Gothic remains render each place of worship venerable. Nature in her holiday dress decks the environs, and society animates with intellectual fire the amiable inhabitants. Improvisation at this place pleases me far better than it did in Tuscany. Our truly learned Abate Lorenzi astonishes all who hear him by repeating, not singing, a series of admirably just and well-digested thoughts which he, and he alone, possesses the power of arranging suddenly as if by magic and methodically as if by study to rhymes the most melodious and most varied, while the Abbé Berthola of the University of Pavia gives one pleasure by the same talent in a manner totally different, singing his unpremeditated strains to the accompaniment of a harpsichord, round which stand a little chorus of friends who interpolate from time to time 2 lines of a well-known song, to which he pleasingly adapts his compositions, and goes on gracing the barren subject and adorning it with every possible decoration of wit and every desirable elegance of sentiment. Nothing can surely surpass the happy promptitude of his expression, unless it is the brilliancy of his genius. But I will not be seduced by the pleasures of praising my sweet friends of Verona to lengthen this chapter with further panegyrics upon a place I leave with the truest tenderness and with the sincerest regret. But the correspondence I hope long to maintain with the charming Contessa Mosconi must compensate all it can for the loss of her agreeable coterie, where my most delightful evenings have been spent, where so many topics of English literature have been discussed, where Lorenzi read Tasso to us of an afternoon, Bertola made verses, and the Cavalier Pindemonte conversed, where the 3 Graces, as they are called, joined their sweet voices to sing when satiety of pleasure made us change our mode of being happy and kept one from ever wishing to hear anything else, while Countess Carminati sang Bianchi's duets, with the only tenor fit to accompany a voice so touching and taste so refined. Verona, qui te verit et non amaret, says some old writer, I forget who, protinus is credo se ipsum non amat. Note, whoever sees thee without being smitten with extraordinary passion must, I think, be incapable of loving even himself. End note. Indeed, I never saw people live so pleasingly together as these do, the women apparently delighting in each other's company without mean rivalry or envy of those accomplishments which are commonly bestowed by heaven with diversity enough for all to have their share. The world surely affords room for everybody's talents. Would everybody that possessed them but think so, and were malice and affectation once completely banished from cultivated society, Verona might be found in many places perhaps. She is now confined, I think,
to the sweet state of Venice. End of chapter 12, part 2. End of Glimpses of Italian Society in the 18th Century by Hester Lynch PIOZZI.